No. We met. In LA, of course. Your Matt's sister, Danny said kindly. Right. Have you heard any news from him? This brought Danny up short. Why would Claire be asking him such a question? Wasn't Matt staying at her house? To be honest, the last thing Danny Maguire wanted to think about right then was Matt Daly. After stumbling across Lyle Rinaldo's picture, Frankie Mancini's picture, in the Beeches yearbook earlier that day, he had hunted down Carol Bingham in high excitement. The director had introduced him to Marianne Waits, one of the facility's catering staff and the only individual still on payroll who had been around in Mancini's day. Danny hadn't expected much from Mrs. Waits, but it turned out the old lady had an encyclopedic memory, and was able to point out another face from the yearbook, a face that belonged to someone who had known Mancini well. Thick as thieves, they were, those two. His name was Victor Dublenko. A quick call to the NYPD revealed that they knew Dublenko well, as a pimp and occasional dealer, still alive, currently out of jail and living in Queens, not 6 blocks from the Beaches, where Danny was standing at that very moment. Danny had been about to head off to Dublenko's apartment when Claire called. Reluctantly, he turned his attention back to Matt Daly. No. I haven't heard a word from him since I saw him at your place. He's not there with you? If he were here with me, he wouldn't be calling, would I? Snapped Claire. I'm sorry. I don't mean to take it out on you. But I'm worried about him. He left me a voicemail last night that literally made no sense. Did he say where he was? Yeah. Has in Italy. Italy? Aha. The Amalfi Coast. He said he had some lead about the man who may have abducted Lisa. To be frank with you, I'm surprised he had the money for a plane ticket. God knows how he's surviving out there. Danny's heart sank. Matt had sworn to him that had let it go, that he wouldn't go chasing down this maniac on his own. Now that the powers that be at Interpol had officially sanctioned Operation Azrael, the last thing Danny needed was a mentally unstable Matt Daly casting through his case like a bull elephant, interfering with potential witnesses and, for all he knew, withholding key evidence. Had Matt no mention of an Italian lead when he and Danny met? Did he say anything else? He said a lot of things, but like I said, he was rambling. He said Lisa's lover wasn't her lover. He was gay. He said that she knew him before she knew Miles, which for some reason he thought was important, but that he couldn't be Azrael, that you and the other officers were on the wrong track. Who the hell is Azrael? No one, said Danny. It's a codename. Don't worry about it. He too was worried about Matt, personally as well as professionally. I appreciate your calling me, he told Claire. I'm on my way to an important meeting right now, but afterward I'll try to contact your brother again. In the meantime, if you hear anything else, anything at all, I'll let you know. Has not in any danger, is he? Danny could hear the anxiety in her voice. No, he lied. I don't think so. I'll put a call into the local police in Amalfi, just in case. Ask them to keep an eye out for him. The conversation with Claire Michaels was bothering him. Had Matt Daly really gotten a useful lead on Lisa's lover? Without talking to him, it was impossible to figure out how much of what had told his sister was real, and how much a figment of his fevered, anxiety-wrecked imagination. By the time Danny reached Dublenko's apartment, his train of thought was hopelessly muddled. Lyle Rinaldo. Frankie Mancini. What connection could the boy in the yearbook photograph possibly have to Italy and Lisa Baring? Why was Danny even here? 5 minutes later Victor Dublenko appeared to be asking himself the same question, glaring at Danny from his grimy, vinyl Latzet boy recliner. I got nothing to say. Dublenko's living room was disgusting, a fetid dump littered with stained cushions, needles, dead marijuana plants and half-eaten plates of food. Down the hallway, the 2 bedrooms were cleaner. Clients expected a certain standard of hygiene, and Victor Dublenko made sure he provided it. Bedrooms were for business. But for himself, Victor was quite happy to live in shit. I don't like cops. Danny Maguire shrugged amiably. I don't like pimps. But hey, what are you gonna do? We're each an occupational hazard of the other. Victor Dublenko left, a phlegmy, guttural sound that quickly morphed into a hacking cough. Pulling a handkerchief out of his pocket, he spat something vile into it and stuffed it back into the pocket. So we don't like each other. But we can still do business, right? You pay, he talk. Just then a very young, very skinny girl in shorts and a vest wandered into the room looking disoriented. Victor Dublenko snarled at her and she scurried out like a frightened beetle. Poor kid, thought Danny. She couldn't have been more than 15. Scum like Dublenko made him want to poke her. But he reminded himself why he was here, how many lives might depend on Dublenko's information, and bit his tongue. Pulling a wad of 50s out of his jacket pocket, he licked his fingers and made a show of counting them before carefully putting them back. I prefer you talk, I pay, if it's all the same to you, Mr. Dublenko. Without taking his eyes off the pocket with the money in it, the pimp said flatly, so what I want to know. Danny handed over the yearbook picture. Do you remember this guy? Jesus. Dublenko smiled, revealing a crooked collection of mostly gold teeth. Frankie Mancini, man. Where the fuck you get this? The coughing was back with a vengeance. Danny Maguire waited for Victor to clear his tobacco-ruined lungs, gasping for breath like a stranded fish. From the beaches. I was there earlier. Mrs. Waits mentioned that you and Frankie were both residents of the home between 1986 and 1988 and that you were close. Is that correct? Victor Dublenko's green eyes narrowed. Mrs. Waits. That old bitch is still alive. Is that correct, Mr. Dublenko? Victor nodded. You know a lot about my past, detective. I'm flattered. Danny didn't bother to conceal his contempt. Frankly, I'm not interested in your past. I'm interested in Frankie Mancini. When did you last see him? Dublenko shook his head. A long time ago, man. Years, too many years. Maybe 20. Where? Right here, in New York. He got transferred to another home the year after this picture was taken and we kept in touch for a while. But then he got a job out west somewhere and that was that. Out west. Los Angeles, where he became Lyle Rinaldo and met Angela Jakes, where it all started. You never heard from him again? We weren't exactly the pen pal types, Dublenko sneered. So what are you after him for? He done something wrong. Robbed a bank? Would it surprise you if he had? Dublenko reflected for a moment. Yeah, it would, actually. I always figured he'd do well for himself. Why'd you figure that? Well, for one thing, he was smart. Foreign languages, math, there was nothing that kid couldn't do. And for another, just look at him. With a face like that, your life is easy. The words could have been interpreted as bitter, but there was no resentment in Dublenko's tone. Quite the opposite, in fact. He sounded admiring. Nostalgic. Affectionate, even. Easy in what way? You mean he was successful with girls? A grin spread across Dublenko's toad-like features. Frankie wasn't interested in girls, detective. That wasn't his team, if you know what I mean. A shiver ran down Danny's spine. What had Claire Michael said to him about Matt Daly's call from Italy? Lisa's lover wasn't her lover. He was gay. He couldn't be Azrael. You're on the wrong track. Now, that's not to say women weren't interested in him. The bitches were all over him like fleas. And like I say, Frankie was smart. He used that power to his advantage. Danny thought of Lyle Rinaldo, the way that had wheedled his way into Angela Jaquez's life, how had gotten her to trust him, perhaps even lured her to her death. Used it in what way? Oh, you know. Had get girls to do stuff for him, get him gifts, cover for him when he broke curfew. Little shit like that. But he never really dug women, if you know what I mean. Danny was growing tired of Dublenko's less than subtle euphemisms. You get it, Dublenko. Frankie was gay. Yeah, he was gay, alright, but it was more than that. I kinda got the feeling that women, repulsed him. Not just sexually, but as people. Apart from the princess, of course. The princess? Dublenko's expression soured. Princess Sophia. That's what he called her. Fuck knows what her real name was. Frankie was totally obsessed by her. You resented their friendship? Whatever. Dublenko waved a hand dismissively. It was bullshit, that's all. I remember Frankie telling me she was descended from the Moroccan royal family. Sure. That's how she wound up dumped on the streets in Brooklyn, right? Danny hesitated. Something Dublenko just Zaid had reminded him of something, but he couldn't think what. I left the beaches before Sophia arrived there, but I met her once, right before Frankie left town, and a precious little bitch she was too. I heard that before she met Frankie, the male staff at her previous home used to pass her around like one of those blow-up dolls. Give it to her up her, royal us. Victor Dublenko left lecherously at the memory. She was just another skank, used goods, but Frankie didn't want to hear it. My princess, he called her. She put some kinda spell on him. After satisfying himself that Dublenko had told him all he knew, Danny paid him and caught a cab back to his hotel. It was dark now and bitterly cold outside. Retreating to the warm cocoon of his room, he locked the door, threw his notes, tape recorder and briefcase on the bed and checked his messages. Nothing interesting. After a brief call to Celine, for the third night in a row Danny got to tell his wife's voicemail how much he loved and missed her, and another failed attempt to reach Matt Daly, he dialed Claire Michaels' number. This gay guy that Matt mentioned, Lisa's lover. Did he tell you his name? I don't think so, said Claire. Oh wait. He might have said something in passing. Franco? Francesco? Is that possible? Hanging up, Danny stripped off his clothes and jumped into the shower. Something about pounding jets of hot water always helped him think. He felt as if today had been handed multiple pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. And if he could only somehow see how they fit together, he might have the answer to this riddle. The problem was that they weren't the pieces had been looking for. He came to New York looking for information about Lisa Baring's past. Instead, had learned a lot about Lyle Rinaldo's. Only there was no Lyle Rinaldo, there was only this Frankie Mancini. Frankie Mancini, who was gay, so he couldn't be Azrael the rapist killer, right? But who was apparently linked with Lisa Baring. Though not as her lover. Just as Frankie had not been Princess Sophia's lover, whoever she may have been. Just as Lyle Rinaldo had not been Angela Yaca's lover. Everything was linked, but each link came full circle back to itself rather than connecting with the others. Lisa, Lyle, Frankie. Lisa, Angela, Sophia. What am I not seeing? It wasn't just the people who came full circle but the places too. New York, LA, Hong Kong, Italy, New York. And Morocco. That's it. Dublenko said Frankie's Princess Sophia claimed to come from Morocco. That's where Matt Daly and Lisa were going to run off to before Lisa disappeared. Was Morocco important, or just a coincidence? Danny's head ached. Drying himself off, he sat down on the bed and looked again at Frankie Mancini's photograph in the Beaches yearbook. Lyle Rinaldo smiled mockingly back at him. Frankie was younger than Lyle, his face more fleshy and rounded. Yet despite the differences, they were clearly the same person. On instinct, without really knowing why, Danny switched on his computer and pulled up the picture Inspector Liu had provided of Lisa Baring, the one had given the NYPD and various agencies and organizations in the city with so little success. He stared at Lisa's face for a long time, almost as if he expected her to speak, to reveal her secrets. Finally he zoomed in on her eyes, the eyes that had bewitched Matt Daly, and presumably Miles Baring before him, reducing him to a shadow of his former self. They reminded Danny of other eyes he had seen. Eyes he had seen somewhere else. Eyes he had seen long ago. All at once, there it was. Literally staring him in the face. Heart pounding, Danny Maguire picked up the telephone. How could I have been so blind?